This video contains spoilers for Chapter 5 of Doctor Who Flux. Survivors of the Flux packs a lot inside of its 50-minute runtime, following through on the Doctor being sent to Division, our companions stuck in the early 20th century, the Grand Serpent's infiltration of Unit, Carvanista dragging Bell to Earth, Vinder caught by Passenger, as well as finally getting something out of that tunnel guy. And here's where we start to see the problem. There is a lot crammed within 50 minutes, and not all of it is essential. Although I enjoyed my time watching Survivors of the Flux, this chapter definitely would have benefited from being a little more focused. When you have a substantial portion of your show focusing on characters who are not the primary characters, you've got to be quite careful about how you're handling that, because you don't want to be presenting characters who are either uninteresting or just not fully rounded at all. That definitely happened in here. There are a number of characters who are fairly one note, which can be pretty damaging to the overall piece if they take up too much time, which did happen within this episode. We spend roughly 17 minutes focusing on scenes without any of the main three from this season, which at close to a third of the chapter is a significant amount of time. So let's go over these scenes and characters, figure out what was essential, what wasn't, and importantly, what did or didn't work and why. Firstly, it's hard to be all that invested by these scenes with the Grand Serpent. The performance is fine, and I certainly preferred this take to a villain when compared with that of Swarm and Azure, but it also feels pretty familiar. In the time that we are focused on this character, I feel like I get him well enough, but not really anything beyond that. He's a fine presence, if not particularly menacing. Sure, he kills people with his CGI snake, but the episode certainly doesn't seem interested in developing his character beyond this archetype of a villain. Unless the next episode does something substantial with his character, then his ultimate purpose will have been to help the Sontarans invade Earth, and there's quite a bit of time dedicated to him and his plan. So hopefully something will be done with him later, but even then, his use within here didn't give me that much to latch onto in terms of a character, and it was all just building up to the one thing that he did of actual consequence. If those scenes had been a little more engaging and a little less by the numbers, perhaps I wouldn't mind so much, but the truth is, while I was somewhat engaged by them, they just didn't offer me much of value. The character he interacts with, whose name didn't stick with me, is fine, again, as is to be expected with these characters who take up a few minutes of screen time, but can't or aren't developed much. Kate Stewart also gets briefly thrown in the mix. Hopefully there's some time for her next week, but we'll see about that. I'm getting a little tired of Vinder and Bell's stuff, just because I find it less engaging each time. I mean, I get it. They're looking for each other, and in the meantime, they're not finding each other, so what do their scenes offer? Well, Vinder gets caught and meets Diane, I suppose. There's certainly not time to do much with him, but there is time to distract from other plot threads. The same is true for Belle. I don't learn more about her here, but she shows up for a few minutes to get dragged away from her search for Vinder. I got a decent enough sense of these characters in the third chapter, but since then the show hasn't done a particularly good job at enhancing that understanding and giving me more from the characters. In Belle's case, at least the last chapter did something for her, even though those scenes felt like they didn't mesh well with the rest of what was going on. The scenes in Survivors of the Flux with Belle or Vinder were okay, but I just didn't get that much out of them. Now, all of this ideally isn't the worst thing in the world if the actual story is engaging, but a lot of times that just wasn't really the case. I'm not all that invested in the Belle and Vinder scenes, because not that much is done with them beyond the characters to intrigue me, and certainly very little is done with the actual characters at all. The same goes for the Grand Serpent and Unit stuff. It's fine, but I just don't get all that much out of it. Now, look, I've been fairly critical of the episode so far because in many ways it did not connect with me, but I still had a pretty good time with this one. Sure, it's playing with too much without actually doing much of substance, but it's also a fairly good time to watch on the whole, especially when you take into account the other 32 or so minutes with the Doctor and her companions respectively. I mean, there's still things that don't land with me inside of their scenes, but on the whole it is a fair amount of fun. The fact that these people have been on Earth for 3 years without the Doctor is wild. They've just been trying to get by and looking for a way out this whole time. And there are some good moments that play with that. I like how they already seem to have a rhythm to their dynamic and how they go about things. After all, they've been here quite a while. They're exploring sealed tombs that for some reason have lit candles. Maybe it was that tunnel guy or something, I don't know. But regardless, it's fairly fun to watch them go around the world just looking for any way out of here, even though there is pretty much nothing they can do. I like the moment of Yaz playing back the doctor's message. The fact that she has it memorized after all these years feels very true, and it's a neat touch. There's also comedy beats that don't totally land with me.
Now, what was it again? One tug.
But that doesn't ruin the episode, and there's been plenty of comedy that hasn't landed within this season. Oh, and that hermit was perhaps a little bit too cringy for me. There were brief moments that landed, but on the whole, I wasn't big on his appearance at all. So it's certainly fun to watch them go around the world, but you also get the sense that if they were going to spend so much time on that, perhaps they should have given more scenes reflecting on the position these characters were in. We do get a little of that, but I think those character moments would have been far more meaningful than somebody trying to blow them up with a bomb. Although there was one pretty funny moment of somebody attacking them.
One lump or two, sir.
One, please.
I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but it plays like a joke and I was amused by it, so I'll certainly count it. The stuff I was actually most engaged by were the scenes with the Doctor. I am intrigued by the storyline about her past, and I like some of the stuff that has come out of it, so it's not surprising I was invested by the Doctor attempting to learn about that past, and meeting somebody who she doesn't remember. It's not perfect, and I could certainly nitpick about some of the presentation and dialogue, but I was absolutely intrigued and invested throughout these scenes with the Doctor. I also thought the angel stealing her voice was pretty fun, and a neat little way to kick off the chapter.
You've encased me in a weeping angel form to transport me somewhere. Why? It amused us. You fear us, Doctor, you always have. And now your form is ours. We have dominion over you.
Tectayun I haven't fully made up my mind on, but overall I think she is as effective as she needs to be. I would have liked to get a better understanding of her before she died, but I got enough to not be too disappointed. I get this is a big mystery, but as an audience member, I do need to be given enough when all is said and done for it to have been worth the mystery, either in the answers at the end or even as the mystery is progressing. So I would have liked to get more from her, but I think she worked well enough. Not much to say about Swarm and Azure, they are barely in here. They hardly add or take away from the experience. They're fine. In terms of 13's inner conflict, I do like it. I think that learning she has such an expansive past that has been taken from her, and that a lot of her life is a lie, would certainly mess with her perspective on herself and the universe. I do buy that, and I also buy that she would want to know more. However, there have been some points along the way that Chibnall hasn't fully landed this. At the end of The Timeless Children, there's that moment that affirms that she's still the Doctor no matter what.
All this? It means I'm not who I thought I was.
Because your memories aren't compatible with what you've learned today.
Yes.
Have you ever been limited by who you were before?
Now that does sound like me talking.
And yet she is still struggling with it all this time later. You know, I guess that's possible, although it just doesn't feel authentic to me. I just hope they don't try to repeat that moment in the next episode where she basically just says, "It's not my past that defines who I am today, I am the Doctor and I always will be." It's what I kind of expect, and it's hard to see exactly what direction they'll go in other than that. I guess there's things that I like about her struggling with her identity, but also some ways in which it doesn't fully land. But hopefully Chibnall knows what he's doing and manages to get me fully on board in the finale. And one of the most unfortunate things about this episode is how little it held up during my rewatch. I enjoyed it a lot more the first time around, but I knew I had to see it again to determine how well it all held together, and it really doesn't flow as well as I hoped it would. I found that a lot of the scenes are so by the numbers and surface level that on rewatch, I just get very little out of them. There's so much packed within here that the episode never finds the time to develop most of what it presents, which means that an unfortunate amount of Survivors of the Flux is just fluff without much meaning behind it. It's not that the story is hard to follow, it's just not that engaging. It really isn't overly complex, it's just playing with a lot and not doing much of substance with almost all of those elements. It's an enjoyable enough experience, but on rewatch in particular, it feels even hollower than it did on my first time through, to the point that I had a difficult time pinpointing my numerical rating this time around. Also, that tunnel guy, what a prick.
Can I just check? You're not a ghost, are you? Ow!
Was that ghostly, sir? Did you feel it?
But I guess he had some purpose within this story, although I can't help but feel that perhaps too much screen time was dedicated to a guy whose ultimate point is that he can help characters get to different time periods and locations. I don't know, he just seems to be fulfilling this function without actually being that compelling of a character at all, and taking up some notable time that could have been used to develop one of the other million things that has been thrown into Flux. Overall, I did have a good time with Survivors of the Flux. I may have been quite critical in this review, but in spite of being overstuffed and unfocused, there were still a number of things to make it worth the watch. The Doctor is compelling and her storyline is intriguing, there are some good moments with the companions, and I was invested enough in their scenes, but that is where most of my compliments end. It's an enjoyable experience, but also has a lot of decent or not particularly good scenes that hold it back from being anything more than just a somewhat fun time. I do like this episode on the whole, it is a fairly entertaining experience, and I'm going to give Survivors of the Flux a rating of 7 out of 10. Look, I know I was a bit more critical on this one than usual, but honestly, I just wanted you to understand why it didn't work as well for me as I hoped it would. And that does it for this review. Be sure to leave your thoughts on this one down below if you feel like doing so. I will be back with a review of the finale of Flux, The Vanquishers, as well as the New Year's Day special to kick off 2022, and a whole new batch of Season 14 reviews as soon as I can finish editing those. I know some of you are missing the classic reviews, and I'm gonna do my best to use the time I can spare to get those reviews to you before too long. I know it's been a while, thank you for your patience, so I hope to see you around for some of that, and if not, that is absolutely fine, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today, and with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.